Imagine this. You're standing at a crossroads and doing what you feel deep down is the right thing. Well, it could cost you pretty much everything. Your job, your reputation, maybe even, your peace of mind or that feeling of belonging where you work.
Mm-hmm.
For so many people, this isn't just some thought experiment. It's their reality. A really stark, terrifying personal reality.
Yeah.
Today, we're diving deep into that ethical minefield. We're talking about whistleblowing.
Right.
That really courageous act of calling out misconduct, unethical behavior within an organization. It's a choice that, well, it takes huge personal strength, doesn't it?
It really does. And often carries a massive personal cost.
Exactly.
And, for most people, the word whistleblowing, it immediately brings up these images, right? Brave individuals, huge scandals hitting the headlines.
Yeah, the big dramatic stuff.
But beneath all that, beyond the sort of legal frameworks and the protections, or sometimes the lack of them whistleblowing, really forces us into some incredibly profound, complex ethical dilemmas.
It really does.
It makes individuals face this really unsettling conflict. Is it just, a straightforward moral duty? Expose the wrongdoing. Simple as that.
Or
Or is it much more tangled? An issue that pits these deeply held loyalties, personal, professional, against these fundamental moral responsibilities. It's not just black and white, right versus wrong.
Yeah.
It's navigating this intricate web of competing values.
that tension, that ethical tightrope walk you called it, that's exactly what we want to unpack today. So our mission for this deep dive, it's kind of got a few layers. First, we're going to clarify what whistleblowing actually is. Peel back the layers, get to the core definition, the purpose.
Good starting point.
Then we'll really dig into that incredibly precarious ethical tightrope people walk when they're thinking about speaking up. Explore the fears, the dilemmas they face. They're very real.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
We won't just stop with the individual, right? We also need to look at how organizations handle these situations. Navigate these often pretty turbulent complexities. What are their responsibilities? What mechanisms do they have or maybe don't have that either encourage people to speak up or shut them down?
Right. The structures matter hugely.
Hugely. But we're going even broader than that. We'll get into this fascinating and often really surprising interplay between truth, loyalty, and identity. Not just inside companies, but in our society overall.
Ah, okay. So connecting it outwards.
Exactly. You'll see how these very personal dilemmas kind of echo on a much larger scale in our communities, in our political debates. It's quite revealing.
So by the end of this, the idea is that you, listening, will have gained, well, a significant shortcut to being genuinely well-informed about something that really impacts transparency,
Yeah.
accountability.
The very fabric of our communities, you could say. It's a crucial subject, touches every level of how we function, small teams, global institutions. And it reveals some surprising things about human nature itself, I think.
Okay, let's dive in then. First things first. What is whistleblowing exactly? Because we hear the term all the time, but maybe the precise meaning gets a bit fuzzy sometimes.
Yeah, good place to start. There's a really clear definition from the Face Up blog. They call it the courageous act of calling attention to misconduct, unethical behavior, or illegal activities within an organization by reporting it to someone who has the authority to address the issue.
Okay, courageous act. That stands out. And reporting it to someone who can actually do something about it.
Exactly. So it's about speaking up, internally or maybe externally, but crucially, it's not just, complaining to your colleagues. It's a formal or semi-formal reporting act.
And it's more than just pointing out things that aren't perfect, right? There's a bigger purpose here.
Oh, absolutely. The same source really emphasizes this. Whistleblowing swims as a vital mechanism for uncovering problems that could otherwise remain hidden.
A vital mechanism, like an early warning system.
You could think of it that way, like the immune system of an organization almost.
Yeah.
Catching diseases before they spread. Without whistleblowers, a lot more bad stuff would stay hidden, potentially causing huge harm.
So we're not just talking minor internal hiccups.
Oh, definitely not. We could be talking about major violations, things that impact employees, customers, whole communities, even the general public. It ranges from the small scale, maybe, to things with massive societal consequences.
Okay, so preventing wider harm is a key aspect. What kinds of misconduct are we typically talking about? What do whistleblowers actually expose?
Well, the range is incredibly broad, really. It often involves serious stuff like uncovering significant corruption, bribery, that sort of thing.
Right.
Or maybe persistent workplace harassment, creating a toxic culture. Various kinds of financial fraud cooking the books, misleading investors or consumers. Or even major environmental violations, things that damage ecosystems or public health.
Big issues. Things that, if left unchecked, could cause real damage.
Exactly. Widespread harm, direct or indirect. And often, these are things that people outside that immediate circle just wouldn't know about.
Okay, that makes sense. But here's where it gets, well, legally quite specific, right? Because not every complaint is technically whistleblowing under the law.
That's a crucial point.
The gov.uk source mentions that for a disclosure to be covered by law, like the Employment Rights Act in the UK, the worker has to reasonably believe they're acting in the public interest.
Yes.
So what does that public interest bit really mean? How do you draw the line between a personal grievance and something that gets legal protection as whistleblowing?
This is where it gets tricky, and it's a common point of confusion. Fundamentally, it means that personal grievances and complaints are not usually covered by whistleblowing law.
Okay, so if I'm annoyed I didn't get a promotion, or I had a falling out with my boss about my own work,
Yeah.
that's not it.
Generally, no. That's usually seen as a personal employment issue. Whistleblowing law focuses specifically on categories of wrongdoing that have broader implications, things that affect more than just you.
Such as?
Well, the law usually lists specific things like criminal offenses, think large-scale fraud, or a failure to comply with a legal obligation the company has, miscarriages of justice, actions that endanger someone's health and safety, could be colleagues, could be the public.
Right.
Damage to the environment is another big one. And very importantly, covering up wrongdoing in any of those categories. That's also covered.
So the cover-up itself is a whistleblowing matter.
Absolutely. So it's really about systemic issues, things that affect wider society or at least a significant group, not just the individual making the complaint. It's about protecting the public good, essentially.
Protecting the greater good. Okay, that clarifies the legal side a bit. But let's shift to the person at the center of all this. Because as you said, it's not just about law. It's this incredibly tough, personal and ethical journey. The Face Up blog calls it the whistleblower ethical dilemma, where personal values clash with the potential consequences of speaking up. That just sounds like an incredibly intense internal struggle.
It is. And often it's a battle fought completely alone. The core conflict, it's often framed as loyalty versus morality. You know, a classic ethical bind.
Loyalty to?
Loyalty to your employer, the organization that pays you, maybe your colleagues too, versus your moral sense, the need to protect others or uphold certain ethical standards.
The question becomes, does loyalty to my boss or company outweigh doing what's right for others?
Precisely. And this isn't some abstract philosophical debate for the person involved. It's real. It's pressing. Yeah. Academics talk about it as the morality of principle versus morality of loyalty.
Principle versus loyalty.
Yeah. Do you stick to your allegiance to the organization, your team? Or do you follow a broader ethical standard, one that goes beyond your job description? The emotional weight of that conflict. It's huge. And often invisible to others.
And a huge part of why it is such a dilemma is that fear, isn't it? The fear of what happens after you speak up. Retaliation.
Absolutely pervasive. And chilling. It's not just a vague worry people have. The Face Up blog highlights this fear of professional or personal backlash, and it can take concrete forms, getting demoted, being harassed, sidelined, or just outright fired.
These aren't small things. They can completely derail someone's life, their career, finances, family.
Totally. So the critical question becomes, should individuals risk their own well-being, their security, to expose wrongdoing? It's an unbelievably heavy burden to place on someone.
And it goes against some basic human settings, maybe.
It really does. David Skeel, a professor at University of Pennsylvania, puts it brilliantly in Knowledge at Wharton. He says, the reality of human interaction is that we often suspect that when we report, we'll be punished. It starts at the playground when you were a kid and it doesn't go away.
That really resonates, the tattletale fear.
Exactly. You tell on someone as a kid, there are often social consequences, right? You get ostracized.
Yeah.
That basic fear of being the outsider, the snitch, it doesn't just vanish when we get jobs. The stakes just get much, much higher.
And sadly, this isn't just paranoia. History shows this fear is well-founded.
Unfortunately, yes. The gov.uk source points to major inquiries, like the one into the Mid-Staffordshire NHS Trust here in the UK, or the Parliamentary Commission on Banking Standards. These inquiries confirm that many workers are scared of speaking up about poor practice.
So it's documented, a systemic problem, a culture of fear in some places.
Definitely. And we see this fear play out in real stories. Protect, the whistleblowing charity, has documented many cases. Take Helena, for instance. She was an agency worker already in a vulnerable spot.
Easily replaceable.
Yeah. She worked at a well-known food company and saw this pervasive culture of racism. Racist language from senior staff, practices that disadvantage Muslim workers like denying prayer breaks or promotion opportunities.
Wow. And as an agency worker,
Imagine her dilemma. Risking your job, your income, to speak out against powerful people in the company, against behavior that seems, well, tolerated, maybe even encouraged by some. For people you might not even know well, it's a massive personal risk.
a truly awful position. What about other examples? Cases where the stakes were maybe even higher. Life and death, perhaps.
Well, there's the case of Eleanor, a social worker. She became really uneasy about patient safety in her local hospital. She saw managers pushing to discharge vulnerable patients way too soon, basically just to meet targets,
Even if they weren't ready.
even if they clearly weren't ready to go home safely. So she faced this agonizing choice. Report decisions that were clearly not in patients' best interests, pitting her professional loyalty to her managers against her fundamental duty to protect those vulnerable patients.
The moral anguish there must have been incredible, weighing patient harm against career suicide, potentially.
Immense. And the risks aren't always just professional or emotional. They can be physical too. Amal's story really highlights this.
What happened to Amal?
She worked for a charity providing well-being services. She'd repeatedly raised concerns about the building not being safe. There had been previous incidents with aggressive clients. She asked for better security, safety measures. Her concerns were ignored, dismissed as overreacting. And tragically, this led to a serious incident where a service user actually physically threatened her.
Oh my God.
Yeah. So her story isn't just about a complaint being ignored. It's about the real, tangible dangers when safety issues aren't addressed. The personal threat a whistleblower can face when their valid concerns are just brushed aside. It shows what happens when organizations prioritize, say, saving money over staff safety.
These stories really bring home the human cost. It's not abstract ethics, it's people's lives and safety.
Absolutely. Very real, very human, often devastating consequences.
And beyond the direct fear of retaliation against yourself, there's also the impact on others, right? Your colleagues?
Yes, that's another layer of complexity. The Face Up blog mentions how whistleblowing can inadvertently affect coworkers or entire teams. Well, imagine the fallout if a scandal breaks. Innocent colleagues might get caught up in restructuring, layoffs, or just the general reputational damage to the organization. So the whistleblower might be struggling with that, balancing the need to expose wrongdoing against the potential collateral damage to people who did nothing wrong.
That's a heavy burden, too. Thinking your actions might harm people you work with.
Definitely. And then there's the whole issue of confidentiality. How do you reveal sensitive information without breaching agreements you might have signed?
Right, NDAs and confidentiality clauses.
Exactly. It forces individuals to weigh transparency against the potential risks of disclosure. It's another tightrope doing the right thing without getting sued or facing other legal trouble.
So even with the best intentions, it's legally tangled. Does the law actually require organizations to keep a whistleblower's identity confidential? Or is that more like best practice?
It's more the latter, unfortunately. The gov.uk guidance says the law does not compel an organization to protect the confidentiality. Yeah. It's considered best practice to maintain confidentiality unless the law requires disclosure, but it's not an absolute legal mandate on the organization.
So there's a gap there, a potential vulnerability.
There is. And this ties into anonymous reporting, too. While going anonymous seems safer up front.
It makes it harder to get legal protection later.
Exactly. The guidance notes that anonymous disclosures can make it more difficult for them to qualify for protections as a whistleblower, because how do you prove later, maybe in a tribunal, that you were the one who made that specific disclosure if there's no record linking it to you?
Ah, okay. So it's a real catch-22. Stay anonymous for immediate safety, but potentially lose legal recourse if things go wrong.
Precisely. A very difficult choice.
Which brings us neatly to the organization's role in all this. How do the internal structures, the culture, either help people speak up or shut them down? What are employers supposed to do? And why should they even care?
Well, it's hugely important for organizations to get this right, and not just for ethical reasons. It's considered good practice to create an open, transparent, and safe working environment where workers feel able to speak up.
Why is that good practice from the company's perspective?
Because, frankly, it's in their own best interest for survival and reputation. Workers are often the very first people to see wrongdoing. They're the eyes and ears on the ground.
Right.
Their insights could prevent wrongdoing, which may damage an organization's reputation and/or performance, and could even save people from harm or death. Listening to them isn't just nice, it's vital intelligence gathering. It prevents small problems from becoming massive crises.
So a good open culture isn't just a fluffy nice to have, it's actually a risk management tool.
Absolutely essential for the organization's own health, safety, maybe even its very existence.
So what happens if that culture isn't there? If leaders talk about openness but don't actually live it?
Well, then the worker just won't feel comfortable speaking up. Plain and simple, they'll fear the consequences.
Because they've seen what happens.
Maybe. The gov.uk source points to the two main barriers, a fear of reprisal and the belief that no action will be taken. If you see colleagues get punished for speaking out, or if you report smaller things and they just vanish into thin air.
You learn to keep quiet.
Exactly. Why stick your neck out if you think you'll either get chopped or completely ignored? If employees don't trust the system, the organization stays blind to its own problems that could eventually sink it.
So how can organizations build effective internal mechanisms? Things that actually encourage people to come forward, not just a policy document gathering dust. What works in practice?
Well, one recommendation from the African Journal of Business Ethics is to set up a dedicated internal forum or committee. This committee should have real authority and a clear mandate to meet regularly.
And its focus.
Crucially, the focus should be on issues and concerns raised, and not people. Discuss the problems, figure out corrective measures, resolve things if possible. It shifts the dynamic from blame to problem solving.
Okay, treating it as an organizational challenge, not an attack.
Precisely. Creating a safe space for issues to be aired and addressed constructively.
And just talking isn't enough, presumably. There needs to be follow-through. Accountability.
Absolutely vital. The same article stresses the need for a feedback loop towards some body of accountability. People need to know their concerns aren't just disappearing into a void. They need to see that reports are taken seriously, investigated, and that there's some kind of resolution or response.
Otherwise, trust evaporates.
Completely.
Oh.
And beyond structures, gov.uk highlights the need for practical support, training, mentoring, advice, and other support systems. This means making sure workers can easily approach different people managers, HR, maybe dedicated ethics officers.
And those people need to know how to handle it properly.
Yes. They need training in how to receive sensitive information respectfully, professionally, empathetically, not just dismissively or defensively.
And the payoff for the organization in responding quickly and internally seems pretty clear.
Oh, definitely. It's massively in their best interest to deal with the disclosure properly right when it's first raised.
Why?
Because it lets them investigate promptly, maybe ask the whistleblower more questions while things are fresh, provide feedback. And crucially, it can prevent the whole thing from escalating externally.
Avoiding the PR disaster, the lawsuits, the regulatory fines.
Exactly. Far better to fix a problem internally and quietly than have it explode in the media or a courtroom, causing potentially irreparable damage to their reputation and bottom line.
Okay, so having a policy is step one, but you mentioned it gathering dust. How do organizations make sure people actually know about the policy, understand it, and crucially, believe in it?
Yeah, the communication part is critical. Simply having a policy tucked away on the internet isn't enough. Organizations have to proactively let its workers know about the policy and make sure they know how to make a disclosure.
What channels work?
Regular publicity is key. Use the internet homepage, staff newsletters, maybe dedicated emails. Consult with unions if they're present. It needs to be visible, repeated, not a one-off thing people forget about. It's about embedding it in the culture over time.
So what should a good policy actually contain? What are the essential ingredients to build that trust?
The gov.uk guidance gives a pretty solid checklist. First, a clear, easy-to-understand explanation of what whistleblowing means in that specific organization. Tailor it.
Okay.
Clear procedures for how disclosures will be handled. Who do you go to? What happens next? A commitment to train everyone's staff, managers on the policy and procedures. Assurance that all disclosures will be treated consistently and fairly.
Confidentiality.
Absolutely central. A commitment to take all reasonable steps to protect the whistleblower's identity unless legally forced not to. And a very strong explicit statement that victimizing or retaliating against a whistleblower is totally unacceptable and will lead to disciplinary action.
Deterring retaliation is key.
Hugely. Also, clear timelines for handling things and giving feedback. Clarification that the whistleblower doesn't need proof, just a reasonable belief. And finally, pointing people towards external advice like Arcantics or trade unions shows the organization isn't trying to keep everything hidden internally. It shows confidence and transparency.
That's a comprehensive list. Each point seems vital for building that necessary trust. How do companies promote this effectively, beyond just publishing it?
They need to be proactive, hold staff sessions, Q&As, get managers to discuss it regularly in team meetings, maybe appoint a visible, trusted whistleblower's champion.
Someone people feel comfortable approaching.
Exactly. Use posters in common areas, include it prominently in induction packs for new hires, put it clearly in staff handbooks and contracts. But ultimately,
It comes down to leadership.
it always does. Managers have to lead by example. They need to show genuine commitment to an open culture where people feel safe speaking up. Their actions, how they respond day to day, speak way louder than any policy document.
That makes sense. But all this kind of assumes an ideal world, maybe. We know power dynamics inside organizations are real. How much does the power of the person involved influence how a disclosure is handled?
Oh, massively. This is one of the starkest realities. The African Journal of Business Ethics points out that the relative power of the wrongdoer versus that of the whistleblower plays an important role in how the organization responds.
So if the person accused of wrongdoing is, say, the star salesperson or the CEO's protege?
The response might be very different than if it's a junior employee doing something wrong. And it also depends on how much the organization relies financially on the wrongdoing itself, perhaps.
You mean if the misconduct is actually generating a lot of profit?
Potentially, yes. The uncomfortable truth is that a powerful wrongdoer is more likely to be protected by the organization rather than be sanctioned.
Wow. So the organization might choose to protect the powerful individual, even bearing the truth.
It happens. Conversely, the article suggests organizations might be more positive toward whistleblowers they rely on heavily. Maybe someone in a key technical role whose expertise they can't afford to lose.
So the whistleblower's own power or importance matters too.
It can. It reveals this complex, often ruthless reality where status, power, and the organization's perceived self-interest, financial or strategic, can heavily influence whether justice is served or truth is suppressed. It's not just about the facts, it's about navigating power.
It paints a pretty bleak picture sometimes, which raises the question, given all the risks, the power dynamics, the potential for retaliation, what are the actual benefits of whistleblowing? Why do people still do it? Is it worth it?
Well, from a broader perspective, sometimes whistleblowing is literally about saving the organization from itself. Julian Jonker at Wharton notes that when the wrongdoing is really severe, whistleblowing can be thought of as a way of saving the organization.
How so? By forcing a necessary correction.
Exactly. Forcing it to change course, avoid a regulatory meltdown, prevent huge fines or even collapse. Beyond that, it helps enforce norms and promote ethical behavior more generally. It sends a message.
A deterrent effect.
Precisely. It encourages all employees to recognize the high costs of engaging in unethical behavior. If people know that serious misconduct might get reported and acted upon, that awareness alone can shift behavior and foster a more ethical culture over time. It's like having ethical antibodies in the system.
Like an immune system, as you said earlier. And to encourage this, there are actual legal protections and sometimes even financial rewards, right? It's not always just relying on pure moral courage.
That's right. David Skeel mentions these very systems of rewards and protections meant to encourage whistleblowing. The U.S. in particular has some significant programs.
Or the SEC one.
Yeah, the Securities and Exchange Commission whistleblower program is a big one. It rewards people for reporting securities law violations. In just 1 year, 2018, they paid out over $168 million to 13 people whose information led to successful enforcement actions.
$168 million. That's a serious incentive.
It is, and it works. That program saw more tips than ever before after ramping up rewards. It shows that financial incentives can be a powerful motivator for people on the fence.
Turning a moral risk into a potential financial windfall in some cases.
Yeah.
Are there other examples like that? Or places where blowing the whistle isn't just encouraged, but required?
Oh, yes. The U.S. has the False Claims Act. That's a very old and successful law, rewarding people who expose fraud against the government. There are specific programs for commodities trading fraud, tax fraud via the IRS.
So across different sectors.
Right. And for federal employees, the Whistleblower Protection Act guards against retaliation. But what's really fascinating is that mandatory reporting. In some jobs, like teachers in some areas or certain New York City employees since the late 70s, whistleblowing isn't optional. It's a duty.
A duty. So you could get in trouble for not reporting.
Yes. Failure to report observed wrongdoing could actually lead to disciplinary action.
Yeah.
That completely shifts the ethical calculation from a brave choice to a professional obligation.
Wow. Mandatory whistleblowing. That's a whole different level. Okay, so ideally, people report internally first. But sometimes that fails, or the issue is too big. What about going external to regulators or elsewhere?
Workers generally can go to what are called prescribed persons without losing legal protection. These are typically specific regulators, professional bodies, sometimes even members of parliament.
So designated safe channels outside the company.
Exactly. gov.uk lists them. It's usually seen as a more responsible external route than, say, leaking to the press. These bodies are supposed to handle such things properly.
Which brings us to the most dramatic option, going to the media. When does that happen, and what are the risks? Because that's often how the biggest stories break.
It's definitely the nuclear option, and incredibly risky for the whistleblower. The general rule, according to gov.uk, is that if you go to the media, you can expect in most cases to lose your whistleblowing law rights.
Lose your protection.
Wow. Yeah. Only in exceptional circumstances might you retain those rights. And the bar is sky high. You need to reasonably believe the info is substantially true, that you're not doing it for personal gain, and that going to your employer or a prescribed person would likely lead to you suffering harm or evidence being destroyed or concealed.
That sounds almost impossible to prove beforehand.
It's an incredibly high legal threshold. It really positions going to the media as an absolute last resort, full of personal and legal danger.
A clear message not to do it lightly. Still, we see high-profile cases where whistleblowers are attacked publicly. Does that create a chilling effect, discouraging others?
That's a huge concern. Marie Schweitzer at Wharton calls it a chilling effect and a serious setback for protecting whistleblowers. When people see someone dragged through the mud, their life potentially ruined, even if they're eventually proven right.
The message is, speaking up is dangerous. Protections might not be enough.
Exactly. It can silence people who might otherwise have come forward with legitimate concerns.
But is there another side to that? Could a really big, prominent case, despite the attacks, actually encourage whistleblowing in a way, like perverse advertising for its importance?
That's the fascinating counterargument. David Skeel suggests exactly that. The sheer visibility of a major whistleblower case could advertise the value and potential impact of whistleblowing like nothing else.
How so?
For truly massive issues, seeing one person make a difference, even at great cost, might actually inspire more people on the margins willing to come forward. They see the potential for huge systemic change, and maybe that outweighs the personal risk in their minds, especially if the wrongdoing is egregious. It becomes a symbol, a catalyst.
A controversial beacon for change. Interesting. This leads us perfectly into that deeper discussion about truth, loyalty, and identity. We often frame whistleblowing as truth versus loyalty, right? You betray loyalty to uphold truth. But is it really that simple?
This is where it gets really philosophically rich, I think. Matt Sleet, writing on White Rose Research Online, argues that the relationship is far more nuanced and complex than just a straightforward opposition.
How so?
He suggests that both truth and loyalty speak to genuine human needs or dimensions of the human condition. They aren't necessarily enemies. They're both fundamental aspects of who we are and how we function, often deeply intertwined. Think of loyalty-binding groups, truth-revealing reality. Sometimes they clash, sometimes they reinforce each other.
Okay, so loyalty isn't just the bad guy here, but how can it obstruct truth? What does Sleet mean when he talks about loyalty being an epistemic vice? That sounds quite academic.
It does, but the concept is quite intuitive. Ever known someone so loyal to a group, a political party, a cause, that they seem completely unable or unwilling to see facts that contradict the group's narrative, even when those facts are staring them in the face?
Oh, definitely. We see that all the time.
That kind of loyalty-driven blindness. That's what philosophers like Qasim Qasim call an epistemic vice. It's a way of thinking, an attitude that systematically obstructs the gaining, keeping, or sharing of knowledge. Loyalty becomes an epistemic vice when it gives undue influence to concerns about group membership. Your need to belong, to protect the group, overrides your ability or willingness to accept uncomfortable truths.
And this connects to politically motivated reasoning, right? That idea that our politics shape how we see facts.
Absolutely. Politically motivated reasoning is where we unconsciously conform assessment of factual information to some goal collateral to assessing its truth, like protecting our identity.
Unconsciously, so we're not even aware we're doing it.
Often not. It's a bias. It can lead people to double down on their false beliefs,
Yep.
even when shown evidence, because admitting the belief is wrong feels like betraying the group, threatening their identity.
Can you give an example?
Think about persistent arguments over things like climate change facts or gun control statistics. Often, these aren't just debates about data. They become key signifiers of political identity, Democrat or Republican, liberal or conservative. In that context, Sleet says, which facts we believe and utter become declarations of loyalty and membership. It's tribal signaling as much as it is about objective reality.
It sounds almost irrational, though. Are people choosing to ignore facts?
Well, Sleet makes a crucial point here. It's not necessarily irrationality in the sense of faulty logic. Our human ability to reason can serve both goals, finding truth and protecting identity. The problem arises when reason gets hijacked, when it serves the wrong or inappropriate ends, like prioritizing group belonging over factual accuracy. The reasoning process itself might be internally consistent, but its ultimate goal is skewed.
Okay, that's a really important distinction. Reason serving identity, not truth. But if loyalty can be this epistemic vice, obscuring truth, can it also be a virtue? Is loyalty itself valuable?
Oh, absolutely. Sleet argues strongly that loyalty can be a dimension of ethical life. A life completely devoid of loyalties would feel empty, wouldn't it? It would be lacking much of what gives life content or texture.
Our loyalties to family, friends, community.
Exactly. Our strongest commitments are often rooted in loyalty to associations, such as families, friends, organizations, professions, religions, nations, sports teams, political parties. These are groups we strongly identify with and often value for their own sake. They give our lives meaning, connection, structure.
So it's not just blind following, it's about deep connection, valuing something bigger than ourselves.
Precisely. He talks about the complex, dual nature of loyalty. There's the value we see in the thing itself, our family, our team, our country. And then there's the value we place on our identification with it, the sense of belonging and purpose it provides. Our judgment about whether something is worthy of loyalty is often shaped by the fact that we are already loyal to it. It's a feedback loop that makes loyalties a really rich, vital part of being human.
Okay, so loyalty can hinder truth, but also essential for a meaningful life. Complicated. Which leads to another really fascinating, maybe even slightly unsettling idea, that truthfulness itself can be a kind of identity.
Yes, this is a powerful reframing. Sleet suggests one is never speaking from the pure perspective of truth, but one does so from within an identity that values truthfulness in a particular way.
Meaning our commitment to truth isn't neutral. It's part of who we are, how we see ourselves.
Exactly. He uses George Kennan's long telegram from 1946 as an example. Kennan contrasted the Soviet system, which he saw as bending truth to fit ideology, with the American system, where policies were supposedly formed according to what the truth is.
So Kennan was effectively saying being American means valuing truth in this specific way. It was an identity statement.
Precisely. We stand for truth because we are American. Part of that identity, in Kennan's view, was this commitment to critical inquiry, evidence facing facts. It shows how our way of valuing truth is embedded in a particular identity. And when we argue for truth, especially against others, we're also performing loyalty to that truth-valuing identity.
And this isn't just about deliberately lying, is it? It's about what we genuinely believe.
Much deeper than lying. The real concern, Sleet says, isn't usually insincerity. It's that people are coming to believe what is untrue such that they're being perfectly sincere. They genuinely believe they're inaccurate information because it fits their identity, their group's story. It's an accuracy problem, often rooted in identity, not a sincerity problem.
So how did our maybe Western understanding of truth get so strongly tied to identity, this idea that truth-seeking is a core virtue?
Sleet points to several historical and social peculiarities that shape this. Things like a rejection of tradition or religious authority as the sole source of truth, giving priority to scientific inquiry and empirical evidence, an ideal of reason as objective, impartial, the belief that objective truth is linked to free societies, unlike authoritarian ones.
Right.
Also, this idea of a fundamental human desire to know reality, a suspicion of vagueness, and linking truth to freedom and social justice. All these threads weave together to create a powerful truth identity for many in the West, one that values accuracy and honesty very highly.
But clearly not everyone shares this specific truth identity to the same degree. Our current societal divisions made that obvious.
No, not at all. And understanding this is key. Sleet talks about non-ascetic identities. By non-ascetic, he means identities not primarily defined by that rigorous, disciplined pursuit of objective truth above all else. We'll think of some conspiracy theory groups or highly ideological political movements. They certainly value truth, sometimes intensely, but their pursuit of truth, their methods, what counts as evidence, is often bent toward affirming and bolstering pre-existing political beliefs and goals.
So truth serves the identity rather than the other way around.
In many cases, yes. It's not that they don't care about truth. It's that its demands get filtered through and sometimes overridden by their loyalty to the group or the ideology.
So if truthfulness is part of our identity and loyalty to a different worldview is part of theirs, is the conflict really just their loyalty versus our truth, or is it more like different loyalties clashing?
It's much more like the latter, according to Sleet. And this reframing is crucial. The conflict isn't simply their identity loyalty versus our pure commitment to truth. It's more accurately described as a clash between those who are loyal to different identities in which truth and the demands of truthfulness are given different significance.
Wow, so when we criticize someone for ignoring facts,
We are often, maybe unconsciously, also performing loyalty to our identity, one where our way of valuing truth is central. We're loyal to our truth tribe, you could say.
Mm.
And that loyalty can make it hard to see things from the perspective of someone loyal to a different identity structure.
That raises a really uncomfortable point about our own potential biases, even when we think we're being purely objective defenders of fact. Our truth-seeking is itself a kind of tribal loyalty.
They can be perceived that way, certainly. And Sleek gives that great example of Newt Gingrich on crime statistics back in 2016.
Remind me.
An interviewer presented FBI stats showing crime was down. Gingrich basically said, look, the average American feels less safe. Liberals have their statistics, which might theoretically be right, but that's not where people are. As a politician, I'll go with feelings. You go with the theoreticians.
Ah, right. Pitting elite statistics against real people's feelings?
Exactly. He framed believing statistics as loyalty to one tribe, liberal elites, and prioritizing feelings as loyalty to another, regular Americans. It wasn't about the data itself. It was about which tribe's reality you endorsed.
And this leads to that idea that maybe those most committed to truth are the only tribe that doesn't see itself as a tribe.
That's Sleet's provocative point.
Mm.
We often see our commitment to objective truth as universal, neutral. But we fail to recognize it as a core part of our own specific identity with its own history. And that perceived neutrality, that failure to see our own tribalism, can come across as condescending or dismissive to those with different identity structures, pushing them further away. It's a real blind spot.
Okay, this brings us to the million-dollar question then. If truthfulness is so tied up with identity and our loyalties shape what we believe, how on earth do we foster more truthful identities in society? Because just throwing facts at people clearly isn't working.
That's the massive challenge, isn't it? And Sleet acknowledges that simple appeals to the value of truth, the importance of facts, have proven largely ineffectual. Why? Because truthfulness is embedded in wider issues of identity.
So the question isn't just how do we make people care about facts?
No. The deeper question is how we foster more truthful identities. How do we encourage ways of belonging, ways of seeing oneself, where a rigorous commitment to truth is more central, or at least less easily overridden by other loyalties?
And this has real political dimensions, right? It's about power and incentives.
Absolutely. It forces us to ask uncomfortable questions about power and incentives. Which groups have the ability to demand their members diminish the value they give to truthfulness as a matter of loyalty, and how do they benefit from that politically? We need to look at the structure's electoral gains, group cohesion, narrative control that reward certain beliefs, even false ones. Understanding that is crucial for any change.
So, loyalty. Definitely a double-edged sword. It can be an epistemic vice, blocking truth. But you also mentioned, paradoxically, it can sustain truthfulness. How does that work?
Yes, and this nuance is vital. Loyalty to an identity can be a powerful force for sustaining a commitment to truth, especially when seeking or speaking truth is difficult or costly.
Like what?
Think about the scientific community again. The shared loyalty scientists feel to the norms of evidence, peer review, rigorous methodology that collective identity helps maintain high standards even when findings are unpopular or inconvenient. Or investigative journalists' loyalty to the profession's ethics, to uncovering truth, can drive them despite risks. In this sense, loyalty isn't the enemy. It can be a collective resource for sustaining the institutions and social practices that promote truthfulness.
Okay, loyalty as a resource for truth. But if that's true, why does defending truthfulness often just lead to more arguments, more polarization? Why doesn't it bridge gaps?
Because, as Sleep points out, when we defend truthfulness against someone with a different identity framework, our defense will often be experienced as defenses of an identity from the outside by those with rival identities.
So it feels like an attack.
Exactly. An invitation from us to foster greater concern for truth gets heard by them as asking how we make you more like us. And that comes with all the baggage perceived arrogance, condescension, judgment. It triggers defensiveness, pushing people further into their identity rather than opening them up to the facts. We forget our truth identity isn't neutral ground for everyone.
This has been, well, it certainly complicated the picture. Whistleblowing, truth, loyalty, identity, they're all tangled together in ways we maybe don't always appreciate. So, what are the hard questions we should leave our listeners mulling over?
I think we need to seriously consider. Are there alternative institutions that might support truthfulness while being judged more trustworthy by those with non-ascetic identities? Can we find common ground, new ways to talk about facts that don't immediately trigger these identity defenses?
Building bridges, not just walls.
Something like that. And crucially, remember Sleet's point, the problem is not rooted in permanent features of human life, but are due to contingent aspects of our current social identities.
Meaning, it's not inevitable, it could change.
It suggests hope. These divides, these ways of thinking, aren't hardwired into us. They're products of our current social and political arrangements. If they're contingent, then theoretically they can be changed, reshaped, though clearly it won't be easy.
What a deep dive. We started with whistleblowing, that courageous, often costly act. We saw it's not just reporting crime, but this complex ethical tangle of loyalty versus duty, individual risk versus organizational structure.
And we saw how the personal struggles of whistleblowers connect to these much bigger questions about truth and loyalty, how they're woven into the fabric of our identities, shaping everything from workplace culture to political discourse. It shows how who we are influences what we believe, and vice versa. Our loyalties are powerful forces, for good and ill.
So for you, listening, here's that final thought to really grapple with. If the way we handle truth is tied so deeply to our identities, and those identities are shaped by our current social world, not fixed human nature, what does that mean for change? The intense loyalty we feel to our tribes makes fostering more truthful identities incredibly hard. It might even require questioning our own deepest allegiances.
So the question becomes, how will we navigate these deep-seated loyalties when they seem to clash with objective truth? What choices will you make when your loyalty is tested? And maybe most importantly, how can you strive for truth even when it challenges your own sense of self, your own belonging?